Scene 1, opening title. Zionism, its beginnings that eventually became the Zionist State of Israel, a land for Jews that many Jews despise due to their actions against Palestinians. Zionism is a nationalist movement that emerged in the late 19th century with the goal of establishing a homeland for the Jewish people, primarily in response to widespread anti-Semitism in Europe. It was spearheaded by figures like Theodor Herzl, who, after witnessing the Dreyfus Affair in France and other acts of discrimination, concluded that Jews needed a state of their own. The movement gained momentum in the late 1800s, particularly after the publication of Herzl's book Der Judenstaat in 1896, which argued that Jewish safety and prosperity depended on having a sovereign nation. This idea was solidified during the First Zionist Congress in 1897 in Basel, Switzerland, where the World Zionist Organization, or WZO, was founded. Many Jews at the time, especially in Europe and Russia, supported Zionism as a response to pogroms and institutional discrimination. However, not all Jews agreed with the movement. Some Orthodox Jews opposed Zionism on religious grounds, believing that only the Messiah should establish a Jewish state. Others, particularly socialist and assimilationist Jews, rejected Zionism because they felt it encouraged separation from the broader societies in which they lived. Zionism gained significant political backing in 1917 with the Balfour Declaration, in which the British government expressed support for a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. After World War I, the League of Nations granted Britain the Mandate for Palestine, which led to increased Jewish immigration to the region, often met with resistance from the Arab population. In 1947, the United Nations proposed a partition plan to divide Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states. While Zionist leaders accepted the plan, Palestinian and Arab leaders rejected it, seeing it as unfair. In 1948, following the withdrawal of British forces, Israel declared independence, leading to the Arab-Israeli War. The war resulted in the displacement of around 750,000 Palestinians, known as the Nakba, or catastrophe, and the establishment of Israel as a sovereign state. Despite its success in creating a Jewish state, Zionism has faced opposition from various Jewish groups, including religious anti-Zionists. Ultra-Orthodox Jewish groups like Neturei Karta and Satmar Hasidim oppose Israel, arguing that a Jewish state should only be established by divine intervention, not political efforts. Liberal and leftist Jews, many progressive Jews, particularly in the US and Europe, criticize Israel's policies toward Palestinians, including settlements in the West Bank, military operations in Gaza, and discrimination against Arab citizens. Anti-colonial Jewish voices, some Jews, influenced by anti-colonial and human rights movements, argue that Israel's treatment of Palestinians is comparable to apartheid or settler colonialism. While Zionism succeeded in its primary goal of establishing a Jewish state, its legacy remains controversial. Many Jews worldwide support Israel, but there is a significant and growing number who oppose its actions against Palestinians. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict remains one of the most contentious global issues, with deep historical roots and ongoing debates over nationalism, human rights, and self-determination. Jewish opposition to Zionism. A deeper dive into Orthodox Jewish anti-Zionism, secular Jewish critiques, and perspectives from progressive Jewish movements. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, a historical and geopolitical breakdown of key events, policies, and current issues. Zionism and settler colonialism. Analyzing Zionism in the context of settler colonial theory and comparisons to other historical movements. The role of Western powers, how British, American, and European involvement shaped Zionism and the creation of Israel. Palestinian resistance and nationalism, exploring Palestinian responses to Zionism from early resistance to modern political movements like Hamas and the PLO. Zionism arose in the late 19th century as a response to growing anti-Semitism in Europe. Many Jews faced persecution in Russia, through pogroms, discrimination in Western Europe, and exclusion from economic and political life. The Dreyfus Affair, in 1894, in which a Jewish French officer was falsely accused of treason, convinced Theodor Herzl that Jews needed a state of their own. Herzl, the founder of modern political Zionism, published Der Judenstaat in 1896, advocating for a Jewish homeland, preferably in Palestine. The First Zionist Congress in 1897 established the World Zionist Organization, marking the official beginning of the movement. Early Zionist settlers purchased land in Palestine from absentee Ottoman landlords, leading to tensions with the Arab population already living there. By the early 20th century, Zionism had gained financial and political backing, including from influential figures in Britain and Europe. During World War I, Britain sought support from various groups, including Zionists. In 1917, the Balfour Declaration expressed British support for a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, despite the fact that Palestinians already lived there and had been promised self-rule under previous agreements such as the Hussein-McMahon Correspondence. After the war, Britain was granted control of Palestine under the League of Nations mandate in 1920. Jewish immigration increased dramatically, leading to rising tensions and violent clashes between Arabs and Jews. Palestinian resistance took many forms, including strikes, revolts such as the Arab Revolt of 1936 to 1939, and calls for British authorities to halt Jewish immigration. By the late 1930s, Britain attempted to limit Jewish immigration to appease Arab opposition, but Zionist militias, including the Haganah, Irgun, and Lehi, also known as the Stern Gang, increasingly pushed for Jewish sovereignty, sometimes using violent tactics against British forces. After World War II and the Holocaust, global sympathy for Jews increased. Many Jewish refugees sought to escape to Palestine, leading to conflicts with both the British and Arab populations. In 1947, the United Nations proposed a partition plan to divide Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states, with Jerusalem as an international city. Jews, who constituted about 33% of the population but were allocated 55% of the land, accepted the plan. Palestinians and Arab states rejected it, seeing it as unjust. On May 14, 1948, Israel declared independence. The next day, 5 Arab nations, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, invaded. The war led to 750,000 Palestinians being expelled or fleeing their homes in what they call the Nakba, or catastrophe. Israel won the war and expanded its territory beyond the UN partition plan, capturing 78% of historic Palestine. The remaining territories, the West Bank, which was Jordan-controlled, and Gaza Strip, which was Egypt-controlled, remained under Arab rule until 1967. Many villages were destroyed and Palestinian refugees were not allowed to return. This remains a core issue in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict today. Not all Jews supported Zionism or the creation of Israel. Opposition came from multiple groups. Some Orthodox Jewish groups, such as Neturei Karta and Satmar Hasidim, reject Israel on religious grounds. They argue that Jews should not establish a state until the Messiah comes, believing that Zionism is a rebellion against divine will. Many leftist and progressive Jews criticize Israeli policies toward Palestinians, particularly the occupation, settlements, and military actions. Organizations like Jewish Voice for Peace and If Not Now oppose Israeli apartheid and call for Palestinian rights. Some Jews, influenced by anti-colonialism, argue that Zionism was a settler colonial project, displacing native Palestinians. Scholars such as Ilan Pape and Norman Finkelstein have written extensively on Israel's policies and their consequences for Palestinians. After Israel's founding, several wars and conflicts shaped the region. The 1967 Six-Day War. Israel launched a preemptive strike against Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. Israel captured the West Bank, Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem, Sinai Peninsula, and Golan Heights. The occupation of Palestinian territories began, and Israel started building Jewish settlements in the West Bank, violating international law. The First and Second Intifadas, spanning from 1987 to 1993 and 2000 to 2005, marked significant periods of Palestinian revolt against Israeli occupation. The First Intifada led to the Oslo Accords, which established the Palestinian Authority, but, unfortunately, it did not bring an end to the occupation. The Second Intifada erupted due to ongoing Israeli settlement expansion and growing Palestinian frustration. This period saw increased violence, Israeli crackdowns, and the construction of the West Bank separation barrier. Many scholars argue that Zionism fits the framework of settler colonialism, similar to European colonization of the Americas, Australia, and South Africa. Key arguments include: Jewish immigrants were encouraged to settle on Palestinian land, often displacing the indigenous population. Israeli policies favored Jewish settlers while restricting Palestinian rights. Palestinians face systematic discrimination, land confiscation, and home demolitions. Israelis and Zionists reject this claim, arguing that Jews are an indigenous people returning to their ancestral homeland after centuries of exile. After Britain withdrew, the United States became Israel's primary supporter, providing billions in military aid and diplomatic cover at the United Nations. Reasons for U.S. support include strategic interests. Israel serves as a U.S. ally in the Middle East. Christian Zionism. Evangelical Christians believe in biblical prophecies supporting Israel. Political lobbying. Pro-Israel groups like AIPAC influence U.S. foreign policy. Palestinians have resisted Zionism in different ways. Palestine Liberation Organization (PLO), founded in 1964, led by Yasser Arafat, sought Palestinian self-determination. Hamas, Islamist movement that governs Gaza, opposes Israel and engages in armed resistance. Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions (BDS) movement, a global campaign to pressure Israel economically and politically. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict remains unresolved. Israel continues to expand settlements in the West Bank, Palestinians demand the right of return, and cycles of violence persist. Zionism succeeded in creating a Jewish state, but its consequences, displacement, occupation, and human rights violations, have made it deeply controversial, even among Jews. Many Jewish voices support a one-state or two-state solution. but Israeli policies and international politics make peace increasingly difficult. The Israeli attack on the American warship USS Liberty occurred on June 8, 1967 during the Six-Day War. Israeli forces launched an air and naval attack on the ship, killing 34 American sailors and injuring 171. Despite initial claims that the attack was a mistake, evidence suggests it was a deliberate act. This incident remains a controversial and sensitive topic in U.S.-Israel relations.